Present.
Carbonaro.
Here.
Daney.
Here.
Gabrenya. Here. Hopkins.
Here.
Rinky.
Here.
President Wallace.
Here. And that concludes our actual board meeting, so I'll roll again to entertain a motion to adjourn the actual board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by trustee Ranky, second by trustee Hopkins. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Camerer.
Yes.
Carbonaro.
Yes.
Daney.
Yes.
Gabrenya.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Rinky.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Village of Bartlett Committee of the Whole meeting for July 16, 2019. I call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to again call the roll.
Trustee Camerer.
Here.
Carbonaro.
Here.
Daney.
Here.
Gabrenya.
Here.
Hopkins.
Here.
Rinky.
Here.
President Wallace.
Here, first item on our agenda this evening under the Committee of the Whole meeting is Building and Zoning, Chairman Hopkins.
Thank you, President Wallace. We have one item under Building and Zoning, and that's the Illinois Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. And with that, I will turn it over to staff to kind of give us a rundown on what you guys have come up with.
Isn't this a great hello to one of your first meetings here, right? Hallelujah. Lucky you.
It's Renee Hanlon. I'm the senior planner for, I think a few of you I might not have met, and I'm filling in for Roberta tonight on this non-controversial issue. It should go quickly. So as everybody here, I'm sure, is well aware, last month, Governor Pritzker signed into law the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. It legalizes the consumption of cannabis by anyone over the age of 21 in the state of Illinois, and the law will take effect January 1st, 2020. So as part of the law, the state recognizes the municipality's role in zoning in regulating the time, place, of these new cannabis businesses. So included in that is the allowance to expressly prohibit these new adult use cannabis dispensaries and other businesses as well. So the law also authorizes municipalities that choose to allow the adult use dispensing facilities to place an additional 3% tax, occupation tax, on the sale of cannabis for recreational purposes. That's in addition to the normal sales tax. Beyond the dispensaries that we'll see opening up, the law also recognizes and establishes licensing procedures for the following additional cannabis businesses. There will be more cultivation operations licensed, craft growers, infusing operations, and transportation operations as well. So currently, our zoning ordinance does allow for medical cannabis dispensaries by special use in our industrial zoning districts. It also allows for medical cannabis cultivation operations by special use in our industrial districts. The zoning ordinance also has some distancing requirements from daycare centers, schools, and residentially zoned property. So when you take all of that into consideration, it leaves a limited number of properties within the village that you could establish a medical cannabis dispensary. So this map shows those properties that only in this area could you apply for a special use to do medical cannabis dispensing. And then the second map shows even a smaller area where one could apply for a special use to do medical cannabis cultivation. So we have done a good bit of research, and in doing so, we called our other planners in surrounding municipalities to see where they are in the process. Most reported that they haven't even had this conversation with their boards yet. They reported that they're going to do that this fall. There are a couple of municipalities that have gone further. South Elgin is one of them. South Elgin's board has taken up the issue and directed their staff to start drafting a zoning ordinance amendment that allows the dispensing of cannabis as special use in all their commercial zoning districts. So staff believes that the area that will be targeted in South Elgin for these businesses will probably be their Randall Road corridor, and they're making provisions for that. And then Villa Park has already amended their ordinance. It's already been approved to allow these operations by special use in all of their commercial districts as well. So right now, we are kind of in the same boat as every other municipality in Illinois. The zoning ordinance will have to be changed one way or the other to recognize all of these new uses that the law and the enterprises are going to bring. So we're looking for direction from you guys as to how you want us to draft that amendment.
All right, thank you. Do we have any comments from the committee?
I mean, just real right off the shoot here, we're so far ahead of other villages even bringing this on the committee. I just want to make sure that this discussion tonight is mostly theoretical. I think there's a lot of information that we could probably still garner from other municipalities around the country. So,
My question was under the dispensing operations, where there's highlighted comments or bullet points. Are these new to the medical dispensing, medical dispensaries? You know what I'm saying? We know that there was the medical dispensaries, we had the regulations for them. Now, are these new points in addition, or or is it the same?
The way that the law is written, the first licenses for the adult use dispensaries are going to the 55 existing medical dispensaries in the state right now. So the state's going to start accepting the applications for new dispensaries in October, but that's only for the existing medical dispensaries to apply. These dispensaries, for example, there's one in St. Charles right now. That dispensary, according to staff, they feel pretty certain will be applying for the recreational dispensing, and the state law allows them to open a second location for that, for the adult use, to keep it separated from the medical dispensing.
they are anticipating delineating between medical dispensary and recreational dispensary.
Yes, they
Is
will.
that part of the law, or is that by choice?
That's part of the law, because they don't physically have to open a second location, but because of the security requirements, the accounting requirements, keeping it separated, where someone comes in and buys with a medical card, they don't have to pay taxes. The next customer comes in, buys for recreational use, they have to collect the taxes. So it's just more, it's going to be more practical for these operators to have separate facilities.
I doubt you'll have too many craft growers that are supplying the medical side of the event.
Does anyone have any idea at all what the volume that this could possibly be? The amount of revenue that could be generated? I don't know if anybody can actually put any kind of,
The estimates,
thank you, an estimate would be fine.
the estimates statewide are more than $1 billion. And that's estimated by the number of users within the state and also some tourism, because Illinois is will be the first state to legalize in this region of the country, so.
But we couldn't break that down for the village, could we?
I'm sorry?
We couldn't put an estimate on what the village would see on that, right?
We can't, taking like very, very rough numbers, yes.
Yeah, Renee was just giving me rough numbers. She said 500,000 annually for not a very popular store, or up to 2 million a year for a better store. So just 2%, our portion of the regular sales and home rule sales of 500,000 is $10,000 a year, or if you're looking at a 2 million,
It's 3%, right?
well, currently, you can add 3% to it. So at a minimum, with just our regular sales tax, with the state shared and with the home rule, 2% would be $10,000 or $25,000 if we added the 3%. That's at
A year.
That's at, yeah, for the year, that's at a 500,000 annual sales, which is a slower store, up to 2 million, which would be 40,000 or 100,000 a year.
Yeah, it's nothing.
Yeah, really. Right.
And it's the cost involved. I know,
I'm sorry.
I would love, when we talk about this again, which I'm sure we will, I would love to have some details about similar-sized municipalities in Colorado, similar-sized municipalities in other states where it's legalized. I'd love for the police department to contact their police department, get some numbers on, and maybe the emergency rooms to get some data on how many people are showing up at emergency rooms who have OD'd. This is not your everyday old weed. This is really heavy-duty stuff. So I would love to get that for our next conversation.
And I had some concerns also. I was having conversation with the officer this evening about how do you monitor this? There's, I believe, 2 officers that are just trained in the village, and the cost of training and the waiting list that they currently have. You know, it's a large issue that I have some very, very deep concerns about.
I also have concerns with this, but I've had 22 residents reach out to me, and 98% of them want legalized recreational marijuana in this village. I don't know what the vast majority of our residents would like, but I wouldn't mind seeing this on the ballot as a referendum question. But I would also like more information, and I want our residents to be informed on the decision they make. That's important, but a lot of municipalities, as video gaming, they've asked the residents if they want video gaming, and they've turned them down, so.
Because it goes into effect January 1. You could take one position, let's say it was, for the sake of argument, that you don't want it. You would amend the zoning ordinance to say, either only in industrial or none at all. The timing is such you can't get a referendum on the ballot before the law goes into effect. So then you could have an advisory referendum and then change it. Nothing, I don't think, precludes you from doing that, but you have to do something, in my opinion, other than rely on the zoning ordinance that says if it's a stated special use or permitted use, fine. If not, then it's a prohibited use. That's not good enough, in my opinion. I think if you want to restrict it, you should amend the zoning ordinance. There will also have to be other ordinances amended because of this act, and there's definitions that would have to be included in the zoning ordinance, one way or the other. But just the timing, if you decide on a referendum right now, this law will go into effect first, and I think rather than leave it unsaid, there should be some direction and understand that you could change your position.
Yep.
Well, and this is purely a zoning issue, possibly a tax issue. So regardless of our decision on zoning, recreational marijuana is still going to be legal in Illinois.
Right.
So then it sounds like what I'm hearing from you, we have 3 options generally. So we can ban the sale of marijuana. We can limit it to certain zoning districts, for example, the industrial parks like we would with adult businesses. Or we permit it broadly in all the commercial districts. Do I have that right?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. So it sounds like a fairly narrow issue for us.
Now, when the medical marijuana legislation came out, we didn't have this broad discretion on zoning. And you'll recall, that we then decided to allow it strictly in the industrial area. This act does overlap in some regards, but until you know what you want, you know, it's a different thing, it's a different animal, the medical, and your discretion is different. Your discretion on recreational marijuana or adult use marijuana is very clear that if you do not want it, you have the authority to do it. Now, it's going to be out there, you can't outlaw it. It's just a zoning question as to what you let businesses do. And there's these other trades, if you will, that are related, infusion and some other things that you have to decide. I think there's some limits on the transporting that I don't know that you could ban that, but here's the legislation. Double-sided, 391 pages. And I saw some of the early versions, and the final version is very different than what was discussed and the input that was taken from law enforcement and things. So they did do some things to change it, to make it passable, but they preserved your ability to zone it out, if that's what you choose to do, or restrict it in your zoning ordinances. That's clear.
Right now, medical dispensaries are legal in the village.
In the industrial park.
In the industrial area. And we approved of a cultivation center.
Yeah, we
The
did.
state only had a handful of cultivation centers, and people invested quite a bit of money to go through that process. We had a party that was interested in trying to have a dispensary. They pulled the plug. We talked to them, and here's our law enforcement people, former FBI agents, et cetera, all about security. One of the issues there was, at the time, and still, the federal government was not recognizing it, and so banks would not touch it, so
It's an all-cash
they couldn't
business.
pay with credit cards. So the concern was you're going to have these ATM machines in the lobby with a lot of, cash in those machines going through.
It's still that way.
Pardon?
You can't put it on, you can't buy this stuff on a
Right.
credit card.
Right. So, but that was a concern, and in those entities, there was a bigger dollar volume. There was a big investment to try and see if they could get a license. Those applicants were hiring lobbyists and things, and it turned out that there was, I think the closest dispensary in this, the numbers were based on state police districts. I forget how many there were total, but it ended up in Lake County, and then there's the one in St. Charles. But it was very limited numbers, even though they had to have these ordinances in place, and we didn't have the same kind of discretion relative to just saying, no, we don't want it, period. So you have more discretion, but again, I don't know what,
Well, how soon do we need to make a decision?
I think we just kind of staff's looking for a little bit of discretion, probably in a month. We could probably bring this back up on another committee, and then a month after that, probably vote, right?
Yeah, we're bringing this to you now because we'd like to have that luxury of time for you to ask your questions and do the research and see what other communities are doing. We don't have any kind of application or petition before us, so we do have the luxury to do that. You get a petition in, then the clock starts ticking. So right now, we have the luxury of time to look at this the way that we'd like to thoroughly.
I personally am against the recreational in our village. I'm okay with the medical. After speaking to some people that know about medical marijuana, I was very uninformed. I know it's a reality now, but I'd like to hear some more statistics. That's me personally. It's not worth the 100,000 maximum you'd get a year, because no matter what you're saying, anytime you lower that bar of it being illegal to legal, you're going to have a bunch more 18-year-olds trying it out.
Beyond the idea of zoning and then permitting, what would be the ongoing regulations? What would be involved in the ongoing regulating of these, and is it discussed in the actual law? how they need to be regulated, and what's the time involved, and what's that investment of village time and taxpayer money into the regulation of this.
I don't think any kind of local expenses are discussed in the law. But the law does set forth all the licensing requirements, and there are pretty strict security issues.
Basically, the regulation is with the state, and you're preempted in the regulation field, pretty much. So we don't have the ability to tack on further regulations regarding it, because the license come from the state and the regulations are in the state law, and there'll be administrative code provisions. But the village can't have separate, so there's hours of operation that are in the state statute that we can't regulate
But
around.
is our police department then required to enforce those?
Pardon?
Or is our police department required to enforce those hours and enforce that code of conduct? Or is there a state entity that then comes and makes sure they close the doors when they're supposed
That's a
to?
good point, but I think if they violate those, it's a license violation at the state level, and they can have their license pulled, not something that we can probably fine for or shut them down. I don't know that for a fact yet. I hadn't, looked at it that close on that issue, but generally speaking, it's, a preemption issue where they're saying, you can zone it, but we're going to regulate it. And, back when we were looking at video gaming, I gave you all kinds of memos on preemption and that. This is written better and clearer in terms of those issues, and it's more clear that we're out of the regulation business on the cannabis issue. So there's things that are going to have to evolve. There's pools of money set aside for law enforcement and things to research things, but it's, it's going to be an effect, and enforcement and, proving someone's under the influence of cannabis is not an easy proposition, and there's a lot of expungement requirements and things on us that are going to cost us money. It's an unfunded mandate in some relatively short time frames. Law enforcement pushed back and extended some of those requirements, but there's going to be work to do to comply with the law when it comes in.
Whether we allow it or not, correct?
Pardon?
That applies whether we allow it, whether we
Yes.
zone for it or
Yeah,
not.
we have those
We'll have to carry
obligations
those.
under the law. Whatever we do, our window, or what we're looking at is how should we zone it? Because that's the power and the authority that they gave you is on the zoning side, not on the regulation side.
Basically, do you want it or don't you want it?
Right.
And so if we permitted it as a special use in whatever district, I imagine that we're going to be limited as to how we can craft the special use.
Right, because they're saying, here's your hours. You can't, there's no case yet, but
Right.
that's pretty explicit. So I'm going to guess that if you wanted to vary from those hours, it's probably a fight. And I don't think you can do it the way it's written.
Well, we could have distance requirements,
They have those now,
limited
distance requirement.
right.
Yes. And then some of those tangential uses, the infusion and all that, there's the ability to have these dispensaries allow for like a hookah lounge type thing, and you can say, no, we don't want that. It's just sales.
We can limit the number, so it's not
Yes,
like video
limit
gaming.
the number. Yeah, so unlike video gaming where there was no number authority, here you could say, we're going to issue one, or, whatever.
Do you have something, Angie?
And I don't remember the language if it was per the zoning ordinance, but it's sort of like, I think a liquor license will allow so many Class As, and so you can do it in that respect, even though that's really more like a license.
Chief, did you have some comments?
I read an article today in Police Magazine. It's called Enforcing the Wild West of Weed. Legalizing marijuana is requiring law enforcement to rethink and retool its drug enforcement efforts. I can make a copy of this and send it to all of you. But one of the things that they're talking about is these businesses getting burglarized and the cannabis that's being stolen being sold on the black market for 3 times what it's being sold for in the stores, as well as the amount of cash that's on hand at these places. So a lot of municipalities are starting to require target hardening of those businesses. So Benicia, California, city of 27,000 people, decided to allow commercial cannabis operations within its city limits, and local officials partnered with the fire and police departments, the building department, and other stakeholders to develop a permitting process that ensures hardened security that exceeds what the state of California currently requires for those businesses. So that may be something that we'd want to look at too, as long as Illinois law permits us to do that as a home rule municipality, and make sure that if you do approve it, that these targets are hardened and we're not running the risk of, or we're reducing the risk of them being burglarized.
Point. Thank you, Chief.
Can you have Paula email us that article, please?
So we'll wait for more information, and we'll bring this back. That's all we have under building and zoning tonight.
Thank you, Chairman Hopkins.
Good job.
Final item for our Committee of the Whole meeting this evening is under Public Works, Chairman CAMERER.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight we have the MWRD Devon Access Flow Facility Update. And I'll turn that over to our Public Works Director, Dan Dinges.
Thank you, Trustee Camerer. As you know, we've been working on this Devon MWRD situation for a few years now. It's all started back in 2016 with an EPA violation on a permit that was had new limits. We were able to work with the EPA to bring our permit back to the old permit limit through October of 2020, so it's coming up, while we worked with trying to work out a solution with MWRD. So the past couple of years, we've been meeting with them, coming up with all kinds of options. We had what we thought had come up with an option last July, right around now, a year ago, that would have involved MWRD taking 2.8 million gallons instead of the 1971 agreement that said we would have 1.1, that they would accept 1.15 MGD. 2.8 is basically one pump, full pumping capacity. And then we would build storage for the remaining. Our peak flow from that plant, based on historical data, was a storm in 2013 that resulted in about 6.7 million gallons. So that's the magic number that we've been basing everything off of. So by taking 2.8, it allowed us to build a 4 million gallon tank, which we thought would be beneficial because we would eliminate the Devon excess flow facility and build storage that would ultimately get brought back to MWRD. We got to the point where MWRD staff, well, at the time we were working with the David St. Pierre, who was the executive director, and his staff. David St. Pierre actually left in June or July of last year, so at the same time. But we were working with the acting executive director, who was John Murray, that was on board with everything. He brought it to his board in August of last year, where they have to get authorization to negotiate a new IJ or new amendment to a contract to their board first. So they brought that to their board on August 2nd, I believe. And the board, I believe it was on consent. They said, yes, go ahead and get that amendment done with Bartlett. So then it was just a matter of working out this agreement. Well, we hadn't heard from them. We kept checking in with them, how things going. It was going through legal and all that stuff. Well, January of this year, we finally got that letter and the draft amendment. However, that amendment had the same 1.15 MGD restriction, but they would allow us to build storage and bring it back to them. We would have to pay for that flow that was being brought back to them. But that changed our plan, because now, instead of 4 million gallons of storage, now we're building more like 5.6 million gallons of storage. If you're familiar with that Devon excess flow facility site, it's pretty tight. There is floodplain there, and it got awfully tight to try to squeeze that in. We could make it work, but we'd have to build it in phases. You would probably still be building a 4 million gallon storage tank, demolishing the excess flow facility and building another tank to supplement that, the remaining capacity. So once we got that, we met with MWRD staff, trying to find out what happened, what we thought we had, was something that was workable for both them and us. And what we heard is, if they do it for Bartlett, then they're opening themselves up to every other customer that they treat, to increase that it's a 1.5 multiplier of the base flow. So if you take an area and you got commercial, residential, you come up with a number, 100 gallons per person type is kind of the standard that they use. And then they come up with a flow, that would be the normal flow on a day. Then they allow 1.5 times that, and that's as much as they will allow. So that's how they came up with the 1.15 for our Cook County portion. And I understand their concerns, because if they do it for Bartlett, they have a whole lot of customers that could open it up, and all their plants are designed based on this 1.5 and all that. So we started going back to, okay, what other options do we have? And what I want to mainly focus in on, I gave a chart to everyone. You should have a hard copy, and then we've got it up on the screen here. Here's the 3 options that we believe are available. There are other variations of this, but let me just go through these real quick, and then we can kind of go through questions. But option 1 would be to demolish the Devon facility, put in a new facility that can meet what will be our new limits in October of 2020. The concern here is, when you're dealing, the flow that is coming to that Devon excess flow facility, MWRD is taking that base flow. So they're taking that. It's when it's a rain event that we're getting flow down to Devon. So we got stormwater that's getting into our system. So it's very dilute at that point. The EPA requirement that will be in our permit is an 85% removal. It's what's coming in to what's going out. You have to remove 85% of the contaminants that are in there. And the technology that's available, none of the manufacturers that we met with would actually guarantee that we could meet that 85% removal. So when you start throwing a lot of money out there and not being guaranteed that you can meet that limit, I get real nervous there. And maintaining that permit opens you up for future regulations that EPA will come up with. And we know that they're not going to get easier, most likely. It's most likely going to get more difficult, which means more equipment, more expense in the future, or potential for more expense in the future. So, in my opinion, eliminating the facility and a permit from us having to deal with future regulations would be ideal situation. So I didn't put a lot of, I would not recommend option 1 at this point, only because.
Well, option 1, if I understand it correctly, Dan, would put us back in the same place, because you're never going to get what's mostly stormwater mixed with some sewage down to an 85%.
It's very difficult.
85% of it out of it.
You'd be spending a lot of money.
And then you're back on the EPA. And so our permit would be a perpetual thing.
Yep. You're always going to be
Everybody
open for
understand
that
that?
new regulation. So option 2 is pretty much what we had been working with MWRD all along, but it's got the new requirement that they have in there, which requires that additional storage. And we looking at it, the concern that when you start building storage, and we had talked about this, how much storage do you build? We're basing it on an event that happened in 2013. tomorrow we could have an event that, surpasses that. But the concern in MWRD's amendment, or draft amendment, their requirement was that we would only be able to discharge back to them even when we're draining that storage tank at 1.15. So if you build 5.6 million gallons of storage at 1.15, that's 5 days to drain that tank. If I knew that we weren't going to have back-to-back storms or have a storm on Monday and then another one on Wednesday or Thursday, if that tank isn't empty, now we only have whatever we were able to drain. That's the only capacity. So now they're saying, you're responsible for, if that tank overtops, we're responsible for that overtop, and we need to be able to deal with it. So then we're looking at, okay, what do we do with it then? Or do we build more storage? And that's why we had the 8 million gallon storage in there, is to be able to buffer, because we can't drain it, empty that tank as quickly as we would like to. The third option is, when we started looking at it, what is the capacity of Bittersweet? As you know, we're going to be doing improvements down at Bittersweet. So we met with the consultants we're working with on the Devon excess flow facility and the consultants we're working on down at Bittersweet. And with the improvements that we're doing, or that we will be moving forward with on the Bittersweet expansion or improvements, that facility will be able to take the excess flow from the MWRD area and not require storage. That's a big savings. We don't have to build a big tank and all that stuff. It will require minimal increases in screening, sizing, grit removal, and maybe pipe sizing based on, and that all would have to get worked out in the design part of it, but relatively minimal increases in that proposed Bittersweet improvement can take care of that flow from Devon. We have to get it there. So what we're talking about is putting a new lift station. We would be able to abandon the Devon, demo the Devon, we get rid of that permit again, and basically put a force down to Bittersweet. That's the cost. That's the bulk of the cost, is putting in that lift station, putting in the force main, minimal improvements when we do the Bittersweet plant upgrades, and we can deal with the MWRD excess flow. So that would be our recommendation, would be to go that route. It looks like it's going to be the lowest cost option as well. There's actually a DuPage lift station that is on that same Devon site. That's an old steel can dry pit, which we, if you remember the capital improvements we've been going through and rehabbing and changing all those, that one's going to be due. So we would build one new lift station. We would incorporate that DuPage lift station, so that old lift station goes away. We have a brand new one. It'll take that DuPage area normally, and then during major rain events, if and when the Cook County area goes over that weir, we would be able to pump it down to Bittersweet and deal with it down there. So it's kind of a quick explanation, hopefully.
That was quick.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
Does that make sense,
Yeah.
based on the three options?
What does EPA hit us on this permit and charges when we keep going over and over? When it's due 2020?
What I would envision is if, well, right now, we're going to be talking to them regardless of what option we choose, because trying to get whatever improvement we get done in the next year likely won't happen. It still has to be designed, bid.
And just so I remind the whole board, the reason why we're in this right now is because of the changing Illinois Environmental Protection Agency requirements, the regs.
Back in 2015, when we had a new NPDS permit, that's when they introduced the 85% requirement. We went along with it and
Started lining this as much as we could.
we will continue to do that. They'll help bring down that excess flow, the more we can reduce that, the less we have to deal with it down at Bittersweet if we go that route, or storage, if we went with storage, it would be, but there's just no guarantees on, I mean, we've done a pretty good section of town, lining and the manholes and the sewers, but you just never know that you're gonna get rid of all that storm water from the system, just illegal connections, all that stuff. So, any question?
Any questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, we're talking about 11 to 12 million dollars, is that correct? For
Billion.
option three?
Did you say billion or million?
Sorry?
Million, yeah.
Yes.
Million.
12 million.
We're in that, yeah, 11 to 12 million dollars, and once, if the engineers, if we head in this direction, we would have them looking at that right now. A lot of it gets down to the routing of that force main, and hopefully we can find a easy route that
Where-
can
where would
minimize
that money
rising
come from?
easements.
Do you know what's the actual?
What's
Where
that?
will we get that money from?
We would have to bond for that, Ray, and Todd ran a few preliminary projections on that.
Yeah, we've already started increasing the sewer rates. We've done 2 rounds of sewer rate increases already for the wastewater treatment plant and anticipation of the Devon excess flow facility. We used $8 million.
Somebody has to buy us pizza.
Yeah, phone's going off.
We used $8 million in projections for the Devon Avenue facility, so this is coming in a little more than that. But we have been working on the rates, and we anticipated bonds for this project.
Now, Adam and I were talking before the meeting, and he brought up a good point when he talked to me, and I don't want to.
No, go ahead.
This is just for Cook County? Will the residents in Cook County just be responsible for this amount?
We did adjust the rates accordingly. We're adjusting the Cook County rates in anticipation of the $8 million, and we were adjusting the DuPage County rates in anticipation of the $25 million wastewater treatment plant improvements.
I didn't understand that. Can you,
Both,
Yeah,
fortunately.
okay.
we did increase both. We increased DuPage County sewer rates slightly more than Cook County based on the anticipated capital improvements that were needed.
But the north end of town is bearing the cost, the 11 to 12 million dollars, and you factored 8 million of it in already on the current sewer rates
Yes.
for Cook County.
Yes, in a 3-year rate increase, we've done 2 years, we have 1 more rate increase to go, and we were factoring in 8 million.
One thing I would add is if we move along with option 3, that DuPage lift station portion, that would be assigned to the DuPage side. So there would be some cost share on the DuPage side because that lift station right now serves DuPage. And since we're we're essentially eliminating that and incorporating it into the new lift station, that portion could go towards that project.
When we have high rain events in town, obviously, that's when the excess flow plant kicks in. For a municipality our size, is that typical? Is it out of the ordinary, to say, hey, maybe if you line more sewers, if you find some interconnects that are sewer or storm sewers tied into, regular sewers, that we could, decrease some of our inflow?
As far as the question, is our experience with stormwater getting into sanitary is typical, I would say yes. When we were meeting with MWRD regularly, we took old flow data from their system and from ours, and it was pretty clear that Schaumburg, the other communities that are tributary to the plant that MWRD runs in Hanover Park, our numbers were very similar to theirs as far as that peak when you have a rain event. So it's not like Bartlett is way out of whack and we have so much more infiltration than everybody else. No, that's not the case. Every community is dealing with it. I think we're ahead of the curve in the Cook County area because we have done over the last several years lining of, the area east of Oak, north of the tracks, is essentially a brand-new system on the public side. The last hurdle that we have are the private services. And we've got a program that will be advertising when we go out to bid for our lining project to try to get some of those residents. When we did smoke testing in that area, we had hotspots where we know services. Those people we will be contacting to try to encourage them to line their service. Because if we line it, we block that water out. It's just until you get all those services switched over, the water's going to find the easiest route. So if you plug it here, it's going to keep going until it finds an opening. So it's a matter of getting all those openings sealed off before, and that's the whole thing, is will you ever get it totally sealed off? No, you're always going to have some stormwater getting in somewhere. So
You're not painting a very rosy picture this evening. It looks like the only option we have is number 3.
Well, that's the preferred. Those other options are out there. It just, I think you minimize your risks, I guess, for future, like the treatment plant option. You're going to be open to whatever regs EPA throws at us in the future. So,
Thanks for the good news.
Yeah, obviously, I think option 3 is the best. I appreciate you meeting with me and explaining this. There's a lot to take in. But the $11 to $12 million, we got to get that number down somehow. I don't know how. Some good value engineering, but that's,
again, they haven't gotten into any of that, so they
Yeah.
will get in that. And I got my fingers crossed that it's going to come in lower than that. Until they dig into it, we won't know, because easements and all that stuff can.
yeah, because if we hover around the $8 million mark that we anticipated spending anyway, the rates are just going to increase one more round, and then that should cover the bonds for this project.
Right.
So, and I know we talked that you're going to try to apply for some grants and some additional EPA loans, so if that's possible.
It's the same area, we just got that grant, right? That same, general area for stormwater revamping? As a $5 million years ago when they had that flood?
We've got
Close to there.
I mean, the FEMA?
Yeah, that's-
FEMA job.
That was
Yeah.
a federal FEMA
I
grant.
know.
This would be south of there. I mean, we're looking at Prospect would be probably the typical route, the easiest route to head south. It's just a matter of when do we veer off and try to get down to Bittersweet. So.
What do we pay MWRD now for our overflow? I mean, we have, none of these costs are factoring in not having,
Right, we don't pay MWRD anything. It's the Cook County residents that get on their
county
taxes.
residents, right? So, I mean, you got to factor that in too.
Yeah, I think that's my big hangup on this $11 to $12 million is other communities that are served by MWRD do not have an excess flow facility.
Gravity flow
They're
system.
gravity fed, like you just mentioned, but it's kind of like we're getting kind of the shaft here, but there was a 1971 agreement made by our village, and I guess we have to follow it, and that's what it is.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately, it's kind of similar to what we went through with our water situation, because we did have an agreement. Now, had that went through, we wouldn't be here right now. We had a verbal agreement to take the excess. But I still think this is a better solution, just because of the fact that you're not storing it.
Right. And the Bittersweet plant will be better equipped to handle future regulations with the EPA.
Yeah.
All right.
And if we go ahead with option 3, if we move forward with that, we're done then. We don't have to worry about this for years and years to come, I hope.
You said the
Well,
IPA could change the.
They could change excess flow requirements, and then we would have to deal with it at that point, but
Well, like Brian said, if they change the regulation,
Dan said that.
we should be able to do something at this point to add an additive or some type of surfactant or something.
yeah, it all depends on what that new regulation is.
That would add to the 12.
I don't know what that may be, but we would have to deal with it at that time. And it would, the nice thing about it is, and we had talked about this, the Devon excess flow that's coming is only going through the Bittersweet excess flow. So it'd only be associated with any regulation that changes on the excess flow side of things.
Precipitated into a sludge by a filter press.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions from the board, then that is all we have for this evening.
Thank you, Chairman Camerer. That concludes our committee of the whole meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
So moved.
Moved by trustee Daney, second by trustee Cameron. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Camerer,
Yes.
Carbonaro,
Yes.
Daney,
Yes.
Brenya. Yes. Hopkins.
Yes.
Hanky.
We are adjourned.